there's a conference going on with the aliens being happy that the terrorists have been they've been taken out, which is interesting because obviously with terrorism, you're either a freedom fighter or you're a terrorist, depending on what the sort of enemy labels you as. Roddy Piper storms the TV station and they find the signal, and he just goes out in a blaze of glory, doesn't he? Like the police helicopter comes up, shoots him, and he sticks up his middle finger and he takes out the satellite, which is projecting the signal that protects the aliens, that disguises them. The way it sort of works is that the signal sort of hides their shape-shifting ability, and the whole world now knows that these aliens are among us. And it ends with one woman who's having sex with one of the aliens, and he's like, "What's the matter? What's wrong with you?" He's like, "What's the matter, baby?" And she realizes he doesn't realize that she can see him for who he was, which is quite funny about this, is that the aliens are just like humans in a sense. There's no sort of, normally when you have the sort of alien invasion movie, there's always like character quirks with the aliens being like, there's something that will give them away. But in this, they just act like normal sort of human beings,
yes, they're very well adapted to operating on Earth.
Yeah. So you find out that basically the aliens' plan was to terraform the planet, or just basically expunge all of its resources and then just hop. That's what they do. They just go from one planet to another, just sort of like milking the sort of world dry, or they're trying to change it more like to our world. Which brings us back to David Icke again, because David Icke said similar things about the Archons or the reptilians, saying that they're basically trying to industrialize the world and change it to the Archon world, the Archontic worldview, which is very mechanical, very machine-like. And it's interesting that he's working on a construction site. You see that sort of industrialization of the cities. I mean, it's the fact that they've got this ability to hide their true form is very much what David Icke was on about with the shape-shifting reptilians, that they've thing is, with Gnosticism, you can't get around the fact that Archons do get mentioned, and it's one of the more baffling, puzzling mysteries at the heart of Gnosticism. It's like, what are they actually? I mean, are they metaphors, the things that can rule you in your consciousness, in your mind? Are they disembodied, separate entities? Or as David Icke says, are they the reptilians? Now, I think I've seen an Archon a couple of times. Depends if that's what they actually are. During sleep paralysis, I've seen shadow people who seemed very it's hard to describe. It was kind of like glitchy. There was a bit like they seemed to be made of like some sort of cosmic sort of substance. Now, I know I was going through sleep paralysis, so you can make the argument that it's just your mind, which is fair enough. But it felt realer than real. It felt like they were actually separate to me rather than being part of my mind. And I think, are they the Archons? Are they these sort of like in the shadows, parasitic sort of entities that feed off your fear? Because when I was sort of attacked by one of them during my sleep paralysis, it did feel like they was trying to, I don't know, zap some energy from me. I felt quite lethargic once I got out. I know I'd just woken up, but I had that before I had my sort of spiritual awakening. So when I did wake up and I started reading about Archons, I was thinking, the shadow people, are they Archons? Are they Archontic forces? Maybe they're completely something completely different. But there's a guy I quite like called 434. He's actually been a guest on the podcast. He says, like, on one of his trips, because he takes mushrooms, he said he saw one of these entities like behind, just in his peripheral, like lurking. And when I've read about Archons, I've had other people online say that they are some sort of parasitical like entity. But I think some people might have their own ideas of what they may be. When you been on sort of psychedelic trips, have you ever seen any entities that seemed a bit sort of nefarious and
Not in this reality. I mean, I've have over 100 trips under my belt, and sometimes I've been blasted 8 universes over and certainly interacted with unusual beings, but not in what I would call the my normal reality, like inside my house or the yard or a place familiar to me, and then also my perception is something else. Now, I will say that on a number of occasions in my life, starting sometime in childhood, I have experienced what some people call the silence. And it's usually in a wooded area where all of a sudden you don't hear any squirrels, you don't hear any birds, you don't hear anything. And you get the feeling that not only is there no sound, you're in a place where sound cannot exist.
right?
And it's a deeply uncomfortable feeling. And you get the impression there is something there making things quiet that you really don't want to be around. And you'll run, and then, you run 100 yards and you're like, the heck was I running from? It was just a quiet moment in the woods. There was nothing actually there. But when you're in it, it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and you feel like something is watching you and it does not want you to be there. Whether that has anything to do with Archons, I couldn't say. But it is a very peculiar feeling, and if any of the listeners spend a lot of time in nature, you may also have experienced it. It's not just that the woods are quiet, it's that you have the feeling that sound actually can't exist at that moment. And you feel your adrenaline start to surge, and you feel very hyper aware and anxious. You get the impression something is watching you and does not want you to be there. And then you'll run for it, and then you'll run 100 yards or so, or whatever. You're like, what the heck was I doing? Why did I panic? That was so silly.
Strange.
And whether it's a related phenomenon, I honestly couldn't say, but it is a very peculiar one.
See, like in an ideal world, I would love just to be able to say that, I think when the Gnostics were talking about the Archons, that it was a metaphor for things, things like which can rule you in your body, like, hunger, for example, could be a ruler. I've mentioned this before, but the thing is that doesn't sort of quite add up either, because we know that if you take substances like mushrooms or DMT, that you can be transported to a completely different place and see entities completely separate to you. And it makes me think, are they the Archons or these machine elves that people make reference to seeing? And I think once we understand what's actually happening on these substances, whether or not it is a case of being actually in a different realm, the spiritual realm, different dimension, that we may be able to get an idea of what they are. And are they the Archons that the Gnostics make reference to? I mean, there's not enough evidence to suggest that the Gnostics were into psychedelics, but there has been a few theories that they were like a mushroom cult, and they used to take magic mushrooms, and they must have got this. It'd be interesting to know where Archon originates from, if they have gone into transcendental realms and met different entities or got this knowledge from other sources. That is like one of the biggest mysteries. I'm guessing. I'm guessing that that probably is the case. I reckon most early religions were founded on direct experience, like gnosis, and I think part of the way to get this gnosis is through chemicals, through psychedelics. Now you can make the argument that they're completely it is just completely psychological. I mean, what does that even mean when people say psychological? When they say, it's all in your head, it's all in your mind, and it's like, well, point to that part of the mind, that sort of place of platonic forms, I guess. It's difficult to articulate, what's actually where you actually are in them sort of situations and them sort of experiences.
Some people argue that a psychedelic trip doesn't count because the only reason you're having these experiences is due to certain chemical and electrical potentials in your brain, which is fair enough. That's exactly what they do. But one could make the counter argument that everything a person considers as reality is also a bunch of chemical and electrical potentials in their brain. So who's to say which is right and which is wrong? Now, obviously, reality doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. But just because you have a weird chemical buildup here and a weird electrical potential there, and it's making you think you're on another planet speaking to an alien being, well, really everything you perceive as reality is a chemical buildup here and electrical potential there. So it's difficult to make the argument that just because there's chemicals in your brain, it's not in some sense real.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if I've ever microdosed, if I take microdoses of LSD, I notice my perception of things increases. Like I'll be able to see, I'll notice more colors, but a bit of sunshine will be shining through the windows, and I'll just notice things more. I'll be able to be, my consciousness expands, not to a huge amount towards the point where I'm tripping, but I've noticed that when you're on like psychedelics, you do get, your perception does open up, and it does make me think that, are we just perceiving things that we can't normally perceive? Like it is a way of dropping the filter of entities that we can't see, whether or not they're on a different sort of vibrational level. Because I've only ever seen an entity once while I was on when I was tripping, and started seeing all this weird like code. I don't know if it's like just the code of the simulation or just the underlying code of reality. And there was this strange little mechanical bee. It was like a little insect just buzzing around me. And at the time, I just thought, this is before I woke up spiritually. I just thought I was just tripping. It was nothing. It was just something I conjured up myself. But now I look back after fully waking up from the last trip that woke me up, I realized, hang on, was I just perceiving something that I can't normally perceive? And LSD does work as some sort of filter. Like it will open up parts of your mind that allow you to perceive entities that you can't usually see. And I thought, is that little buzzing thing, is that an Archon? Is there different levels of Archons, or is there some things like we just can't normally see? And there's psychedelics the sort of key to that. Once I've said it before, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to reality now that more research is going into this. It's more mainstream. Yeah.
And any legitimate scientific research on psychedelics will have to focus on the commonalities, because there are some underlying elements to trips that affect people who are not tripping together, but might also be of wildly different cultural backgrounds, which raises the question of why they're having a similar element in their trip. And I think that is what any legitimate scientific research should start with, is find the common elements and say, okay, why are there common elements from people who have not met each other and are of a different cultural background? Why would they experience the same thing in their trip?
Yeah.
And that would be a very good place to start.
Well, people have talked about telepathy and all sorts of things on their trips, and the problem is it's not like the most reliable source, because once people have got out of their trip, they're like, did that actually happen, or did we just think that was happening? Funnily enough, I've just been reading Terence McKenna's book True Hallucinations, where like him and his brother just go into like I think he's in the Amazon jungle, and they're just tripping off mushrooms for like a good week, and like they develop like all sorts of strange abilities. He sees like a UFO, and yeah, they both lose their minds out there. And like, I'm not trying to write that off his experiences as him just being, just going crazy. Cause I do think he was tapping into something in regards to what you can actually perceive while on these sort of substances. But I don't want to name names, but I've shared trips with people, and we went through something what you would call the abyss, which was not dissimilar to your experience when you was in the woods, but it was like we was just about to cross over to a threshold, and things got very dark, very, very lonely. It was like we felt like the only people there. I didn't freak out, but the person I was with did. And what freaked me out a little bit is like they can see what I can see. We're not on separate like visuals. We're in the same place, and that was really disturbing. And it did feel like
shared hallucination is a very odd experience.
Yeah,
it's like when you like, for example, if one eats a whole bunch of mushrooms and sees a pink elephant in the corner. Okay, fine, whatever. You ate a bunch of mushrooms. If the other people